In this episode, we're learning about Junior Achievement, a global nonprofit youth organization that reaches more than 10 million students in 100 countries with programs that promote entrepreneurship, career and work readiness, and financial literacy. We're also going to focus on how the pandemic has impacted teens' thinking about college and their financial prospects for the future.
People don't always want to talk about, they go, I want to go to my dream college. I want to do this. And at the end of the day, it really comes down to, how you're going to be able to pay it back. If you're pursuing a degree where you're going to be making $60,000 or $70,000 a year, borrowing $250,000 probably is not a good idea.
Please welcome tonight's presentation of What I Want to Do
When I Grow Up.
When I grow up.
I don't want to live paycheck to paycheck.
I don't want to cry when paying the bills.
When I grow up.
I don't want to be turned down for a business loan.
I don't want to borrow a lot for an education.
And then not know what to do with it.
When I grow up, I don't want to be paid less.
Told I'm underqualified.
Or overqualified.
When I grow up.
When I grow up.
I want to know how to save for my future.
Find a job I like.
And start my own business.
When I grow up.
I want to know how to provide for my family.
And invest in my community. And make a difference.
When I grow up.
When I grow up.
When I grow up.
When I grow up. I just want things to be different.
At Junior Achievement, we promote economic empowerment through education, but we can't do it alone.
Welcome to the Inspired Money Podcast, where we explore positive money stories. I'm Andy, your host and financial advisor at Runnymede Capital Management. Together, let's shift our perspectives on money so we can make more and give more to make a bigger impact in the world. Thank you so much for watching the Inspired Money channel. We feature interviews and money tips. If you want to do better with your money, hit like right now. Let's get started. We're talking with Ed Grocholski, Senior Vice President of Brand for Junior Achievement USA. Junior Achievement's mission is to inspire and prepare young people to succeed. The model features community volunteers who share their experiences, deliver lessons, and serve as role models to positively impact young people's perceptions about the importance of education, work and career readiness, and business ownership. Notable JA alumni include Bernard Marcus, co-founder of Home Depot, Marissa Mayer, former CEO of Yahoo, NBA Hall of Famer Shaquille O'Neal, singer Christina Aguilera, among so many others. In this episode, you'll learn about how JA has evolved in its more than 100 years serving students. We're going to dig into the JA COVID-19 graduation survey, which indicates a broad-based concern teens have about how they will pay for higher education, and tips for managing the very high cost of college and more. Now let's get inspired with Ed Grocholski. Ed, welcome to Inspired Money. I'm so excited to have you on the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Andy. Happy to be here.
Let's jump right in. What's your earliest childhood memory of money?
So that's a really good question. I had an aunt who gave me some $50, and I was amazed at the Kennedy and the Eisenhower $50. And so that was probably my first concept of money as something that not only was a currency you could buy something, but also collectible. So that is a very early memory for me.
That's a good one. I like that. You've known Junior Achievement as both a client and from working on the inside. Can you tell us a little bit about how the organization has evolved? I understand it's a very, very long history.
Yeah, Junior Achievement celebrated our centennial in 2019. So, been around for 100 years. And it's interesting how the organization evolved, because it started around the early part of the 20th century when families were moving from farms into the cities. And at the time, business was trying to give young people an idea of how business works so they would understand the industrial process and what it takes to start a business. And so really the roots of Junior Achievement is primarily in the entrepreneurship space. That's changed now in the past 4 or 5 decades. We've gotten a bit more into financial literacy and career readiness. But entrepreneurship and starting a business is still an essential part of what we teach to young people.
Oh, times have changed in 100 years, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
There's less of an agricultural focus.
Yeah.
So, Junior Achievement's mission to inspire and prepare young people to succeed. In your time there, what have been the main areas of focus?
Well, it's been really interesting because, for example, entrepreneurship has changed radically. I mean, I started back in the early 1990s, and, IPOs were not a major discussion back then. All the technology that's used now, bootstrapping, I think our original coursework was talking about how you go to a bank and get a loan to start a business. Well, for a lot of people, that's not how they do it. You've got all kinds of ways to do that online. I think the other thing, too, is the pertinence of our mission has become more top of mind, I think, for a lot of people. I think you see a lot of that in the statistics about how folks struggle with having enough money in an emergency fund, having enough money saved for retirement. I think our whole system has evolved quite a bit as a nation over the past, 30, 40 years. And so these skills are really critical now for a lot of people. And unfortunately, our schools don't always have the resources to teach them. And so that's one of the goals of Junior Achievement, is to help them do that, because, you don't typically find out about money until you're an adult and you get into trouble. And we really want people to try to avoid that.
So, what do the programs look like? Because I know that there are local Junior Achievement. I don't know if they're offices or areas. How do the different pieces work? If you can give us some context.
Yeah, so Junior Achievement, we refer to them as areas, but they're offices. We have 105 offices across the country, and really our programs, they go from grades K through 12, and a big point of emphasis in all of them is the experiential learning component of it. So lots of games, interactive activities, things like that. The other element of it is our programs are delivered by volunteers, primarily from the business community. And the great thing about this is when you look at kind of learning experience for young people, it's whenever you have something that's kind of unique and novel, kids tend to remember it. And teachers are doing a fantastic job, but even they would like to have an enriched learning experience, have somebody from the outside come in once in a while to help out with delivering messages and programming. And so our alumni research actually shows that has a really big impact on kids. About 1 in 5 kids who've been through Junior Achievement said they actually ended up working at some point in their career as adults in the same field as their JA volunteer. So the model has been demonstrated to be pretty effective in terms of really introducing new concepts to young people and getting them to think about it.
Yeah, I saw some very positive statistics about JA alumni. Also, the rate at which they're graduating from, I guess it was a minimum of a BA, Bachelor of Arts degree. So getting a college degree as well.
Yeah. So for typically, I think nationwide, the average is around 33% of Americans have a 4-year college degree. With our alumni, it's over 50%. So there is a significant, that's statistically significant in terms of that. They also have a tendency to go on to higher education as well, or not higher education, but postgraduate education as well. So there is a correlation there between Junior Achievement and that long-term impact in terms of pursuing further education. And even those who don't end up getting a 4-year degree, what we found from our alumni is a large percentage of them have said that as a result of JA, they ended up pursuing further education. So, obviously that can mean certifications, additional training. Not everything is necessarily within a 4-year system.
So it sounds like JA is really supplementing school and encouraging further education in a very positive way. Because I think one of the challenges that when we look back at our own both high school and college times, very few of us got personal finance lessons. Often, too frequently, that's not part of the curriculum.
Yeah, it's even when there are states, about a dozen states that mandate some sort of financial literacy education, but it's typically a semester in high school. And the kind of the knock sometimes you hear on financial literacy is like, well, the classes are there, but Americans aren't financially literate. Well, literacy programs, regular reading programs, you have it in every grade from K through 12. We don't do that with financial literacy. So if we did have more of that, and that's one of the things we strive for as an organization, is to get financial literacy programs in elementary, middle, and high school to help reinforce those concepts, so people are, they call it financial capability, more capable in terms of managing money. So that's really a big area of emphasis for us.
And you mentioned volunteers helping to be a part of the program. Is there a cost to the students who participate?
In most instances, well, first of all, for the students, no. And for the most part, there's no cost to schools either. Every once in a while, we do have some programs we call it capstone, where there might be an additional charge, but it's pretty minimal. So for the most part, most of the kids that go through our programs don't pay anything, and neither do the schools. The way we pay for this, we have supporters from the corporate community primarily, so a lot of businesses are involved in supporting it, also community foundations and sometimes even PTAs. So it's a variety of things, but the goal is not to put any kind of additional cost on the kids or on the schools.
And I understand that you work with both volunteers and the financial partners directly. What are some of your favorite success stories that you've seen?
Well, whenever we look at that, there's a couple of ways. I mean, we have great success stories in terms of those partnerships, across the country with major businesses and even small businesses in the communities. But to me, the success stories are always what happens to the kids. For instance, Mark Cuban is an alumnus of Junior Achievement, and he frequently cites JA as a big influence. He actually has said he learned more about business from Junior Achievement than he did anywhere else. And we have a whole bunch of stories. We have a young lady, Jaquela Dixon from Texas, who started a company called Feel the Color. And she was inspired by her blind aunt, and she came up with a way of doing Braille fabric tags that you can put onto your own clothes, so you can color coordinate your clothes if you're have problems seeing. So those are the kinds of things that when you hear about, you feel great about. I certainly feel great about what I'm doing for a living and what I'm promoting in terms of the mission of the organization. And there are countless stories like that. We hear stories almost every day about how JA impacted someone's life.
You've been involved in PR and communication for much of your career. How important is it for you to be working for an organization that is having such a positive impact?
Yeah, I mean, me personally, I've actually been fortunate because even in those times when I wasn't involved with Junior Achievement, this is actually my second time with Junior Achievement, and there was about a 13-year gap in the middle there where I wasn't involved with Junior Achievement directly. And I've always had an opportunity to work in kind of the social innovation, social goods space. So it's always been rewarding to be able to do that. But what's really important about the mission of our organization is it is life changing. And there's not a lot of things you can say for sure that are life changing in a positive way. But being part of Junior Achievement, the organization, the mission, and all the people involved, it's really rewarding and satisfying to know that what I'm doing is having a positive impact on people out there.
Ed, you mentioned the young lady who came up with the Braille tags. That sounds like such a great business. Can you talk a little bit about the impact that Junior Achievement has on students of color?
Yeah, we have a really profound reach when it comes to impacting underserved communities. We actually have our percentage of students reached that are in underserved communities actually exceed Title I schools. So that is a very integral part of what we do as an organization. And again, we have these success stories like Jaquela. There's another young man, Malachi Kern, who again credits Junior Achievement for having a life-saving impact. He was actually living in a difficult situation in Southside Chicago when he, in the 1990s, and as an elementary school student. And he said the JA volunteer is really what gave him hope to continue. He actually had contemplated suicide at one point, and he's shared that story with us. He's now a very successful business person in Kansas City. But again, he came back to us and told us how much JA meant to him and what a difference it's made. And he's been a JA volunteer. He has paid it back, definitely. And so we hear stories like that, and we know we have a really strong impact on all students, but certainly those who are in those underserved communities.
Yeah, it's very heartwarming to hear those stories of having a virtuous cycle when you have alumni who can pay it back and help more students. How many students does JA work with each year?
Yeah, so typically we're close to about 5 million kids a year this year. Over the past year, because of the pandemic, we were 3 million last year, and we'll probably be lower than normal this year. We don't know yet. We're still going through the numbers. But, the goal is once we kind of get to a new sense of normalcy, we'll be able to get back up to the 5 million students a year. And we actually have about 250,000 volunteers from the communities that help us each year. And that we're actually one of the largest volunteer organizations in the country in that regard. So, we're having a pretty sizable impact when we look at the total number of people who've been through junior achievement through our alumni data. You're probably talking, 30 to 40 million people who've been through JA who remember the experience and say it's had a life-changing impact on them. So it's a really, impactful program.
Wow, really significant numbers. What kind of changes or adapting did JA have to do because of the pandemic?
It's interesting because we started down the road of a blended learning model a few years ago. So we were already incorporating digital assets and experimenting with virtual volunteering. And obviously, with what happened with the pandemic, we had to accelerate that quickly. And, we were actually, it's interesting. So the pandemic hit in March of 2020 when it got really bad. And by the start of the school year of 2020, we were ready to go. I mean, there were certainly some bumps along the way, but we have done, remote learning, virtual volunteering. We've done virtual career fairs, a lot of technology. Obviously, certainly our goal is to be able to get back into those, interpersonal interactions with the in-person volunteering. But given the circumstances that, the hand that I think everybody was dealt, we felt like we did the best we could in that situation. And fortunately, we had been laying the groundwork. We just had to scale it quickly. And all the feedback that we've had from our funders and our communities and the teachers and the students has been that we were able to do that for the most part.
It's good news that you were ahead of the curve there. Did you find that in serving some of the underserved communities that was a struggle because perhaps they didn't have the technology or access to computers and other things that they needed?
Yeah, in our conversations with folks, that has been a challenge trying to reach the underserved communities, especially if they don't have good access to the technology and the Wi-Fi. For instance, I think everybody heard early on. You heard things like kids having to wait outside of coffee shops to use their Wi-Fi and trying to do their homework on a phone. So we certainly took that into consideration when we were doing all this, and we've had some in-person interactions where we've had area offices that have been able to deliver curriculum directly to the kids, print curriculum in underserved communities. We've been able to do things early on. You heard about these pods where they were able to, we have facilities again that we call capstone facilities, where it's actually kind of a town where the kids come for a day, and we were able to use some of those to reach kids as well that were underserved. They could come in and use the Wi-Fi and to do their homework and things like that, but also had J8 lessons as part of it. So we certainly had to do some things differently to engage as many kids as possible. Fortunately, a lot of our local offices were able to come up with some creative solutions for that. And, we really, one of the first things we thought about was what can we do to really help the community at this point? Because we knew there were a lot of other factors in place. I mean, we've even had JA offices, help give out food, as part of their experience. Kids would be coming in, they'd give them, lunches and breakfasts and things like that. So we've had to do some things that weren't, traditionally in the mission of our organization, but given the common good and what we needed to do and respond to the pandemic, we were open to all kinds of different ways of doing that.
That's great to hear. Let's talk a little bit about the 2021 Junior Achievement Teens in Personal Finance Survey. Give us a little idea of, because higher education is such a big expense for many, many families. What did things look like before the pandemic versus today?
So we have done research when it comes to teens' expectations around college for many years, and obviously, student loan debt has been top of mind for a lot of them. What we did find was we specifically for this survey went back and looked at the class of 2020 in addition to the class of 2021 and beyond. And what we found is those who graduated in 2020, about 25% of those who were considering going to college ended up delaying their plans. A lot of it had to do with the economic impact of the pandemic. And even this year, 2021 graduates, about 14% of those are looking at delaying their college plans because of the economic impact of the pandemic. And so, the cost of higher education has obviously been a huge consideration for young people. The pandemic, really brought that front and center for a lot of young people. And I think what you've got is many young people, at least over the past year, did an unplanned gap year. And the question is, what do we do next to help those young people really figure out what they want to do going forward? Because whether it's going back and actually pursuing college or coming with a certification, the big challenge is we don't want to just let it sit there. We need to be proactive in helping people, and that's not even necessarily within the context of junior achievement if you're outside of high school. But as a society, we definitely need to figure out ways to help those young adults get back on their feet and have a plan for the future.
Yeah, this is very much not only a health crisis, but a financial crisis, isn't it?
It is. We've taken a look back at the research from the 2008 financial crisis, and that's probably the only real good point of reference we have for something like this, given that that impacted millennials. And as a result of that, which I think most people would agree, kind of pales in comparison to the economic impact of COVID. You saw a doubling of student loan debt. The millennials, at least in that first wave, were later, when it came to starting a home or buying a home than previous generations, later when it came to saving for retirement. And so we're looking at Generation Z and trying to figure out what can we do to help mitigate some of that fallout, because it is a real concern, given that we have seen that history of how it impacted against, again, that first wave of millennials that experienced the financial crisis in 2008.
Yeah, the Great Recession was significant. And I know that there are a lot of studies looking at millennials and how that shaped their, I guess, approach to investing. Many of them are more risk averse. Many, I guess, statistically are behind on their wealth accumulation. If the pandemic is even greater, how can you anticipate, or what kind of things do you look at to say, how can you help students today?
Well, one thing we can do is, and again, the understanding the risk. To your point, you had a lot of millennials who became risk averse as a result, less inclined to start a business, less inclined to invest. And what's interesting about millennials, when they do start a business, they typically do it in teams, which was an interesting, impact of everything that happened in 2008. From an investment standpoint, for instance, I mean, there's a term that we use around our office called the lost decade. And if you see, a lot of young people don't actually start investing, or young adults don't start investing until they're 30 plus. That's a decade of lost opportunity to invest for the future. And in fact, if you start investing at 20, say if you have introduced to your first 401k or were to set a Roth IRA, you would almost double what you had saved for retirement in that first decade if you just started. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't want to take on something they don't quite understand. And so that, investing's abstract. They think it's risky, so they just don't do it. And our goal is to really to make it less abstract, to let them understand the risk. And then in terms of the career piece of it, I mean, I can't remember the stat, but it was something like 70%, I think, of people who have a college degree don't actually work in the field they got the college degree for. And so there's a great opportunity from a career exploration standpoint in terms of getting kids in high school to understand what their career options are so that they make the right investment. I know when I was going to school, all the talk was around, how do I make the most money? Well, and so you start looking at careers that in the end don't fit your talents or your interests, and with the idea that you're going to be able to make a living from it. And what ends up happening is that you end up doing something else. So at the end of the day, there's value in the college education, but there'd be even more value if it was aligned with what you ultimately end up doing. So these are all the things that we're trying to engage kids in, so they don't make those mistakes. That they, when they go into college, they have a real, or whatever alternative pathway, they have a real idea of what they want to do and a real understanding of it. Same thing with investing. First time you get that Roth IRA or the 401k, put money in. Don't just sit there and put it on the back burner, and then 10 years later you kind of regret you're behind where you should be.
So Ed, your survey uncovered that many students are delaying their start date for college.
Yep.
What does the survey indicate as far as the pandemic impacting like area of study or careers?
Yeah, so we actually, in this survey we did this year, we did not cover that, but in last year's survey we did. And what we found was, not surprisingly, an interest in technology because of the remote work that was happening in healthcare as well. And so it's one of those things where it becomes front and center. People start thinking about it. And so I think as a result of what we've seen over the past year, you will probably see an increase in those who are looking at different careers in the healthcare industry, given the need. And then also, I imagine technology will be another big area. The one thing that that we saw early on with the pandemic, and you saw it with the job losses, was those who were low or no skilled were the first ones affected by the pandemic. And fortunately, over the past several months, as things have started to come back, a lot of those folks have been able to get back to work. But it does show that if you have more marketable skills, you're going to be more immune to these kinds of things. And so that's certainly something that we talk to kids about, is having some sort of education beyond high school, to help you help your job security and your prospects for the future.
And for those students who are looking at the prospect of taking a gap year, do you find that is it to work during that time, or do they get to travel and experience something differently because they're not certain of what the college experience is going to be like, and they want to return at a more normal time?
Yeah, I think last year, unfortunately, you probably had a lot of kids who ended up playing, gaming. I think in that situation, there wasn't enough time to plan, and I think a lot of young people normally would have tried to work, didn't have that opportunity, wanted to travel, didn't have that opportunity. I think this year, going into this college year, you may see more people looking at those enriching activities like travel, working, volunteering, things that will ultimately contribute to their long-term goals. Again, last year, I just don't think there was much time to put that into consideration. I think you just had a lot of people, unfortunately, who were just kind of stuck, as a lot of us were, in terms of not being able to get out of the house and not be able to do a lot of things we'd like to do.
And do you have tips for parents and students, like how to take a gap year and some of the considerations or communication that needs to take place as far as planning? Because I don't know if sometimes it's difficult to return to school if you take that break.
Well, there's that old saying, was it a goal without a plan is just a wish. And if you're going to do this, you need a plan. And you need to have very specific things in mind that you want to accomplish. I'm a big advocate of pulling out the calendar and figuring out what I'm going to be doing when, because a year is actually a long time if you don't have school, for instance. So it's kind of like, what am I going to do? You can do seasonal work, you can do volunteering this time of year, you could be doing some travel this time of year. It's really laying that out. Obviously, too, there's the consideration of cost. So in the good old days, there was nothing wrong with just getting in a car and driving around the country, going to the parks, things like that, to really experience things. Travel doesn't necessarily mean you need to get on a plane and fly somewhere. And so there are those opportunities, but the main thing is to really have that planned out, budgeted, considering the cost piece of it. But what you want to do is you want to make sure there's some momentum going and things are happening, that you're really moving forward with your life and not just kind of sitting and waiting. Because once you get into that situation, it makes it harder to get going again. You certainly want something where, say you're applying for a college or a future employer, if they ever look back and say, what'd you do this year? You want to be able to say, I did these 3 things, versus, again, I was gaming. That's not, and a little bit of gaming's fine, but you don't want to dedicate an entire year to that.
Yeah, if the prospects of becoming a professional esports athlete is not
Exactly.
not looking good, then
Unless you're very invested in that, yeah. If you're a hobbyist, that's probably not the career for you. So
yeah, very good friend of mine, his daughter graduated and last year would have been going to college, but did take that gap year. And she's a very good student. I think she kind of made a hybrid approach. So she traveled, but was working at different places in different cities. So she was experiencing different cities and places on her own, which I think was very good for her. But she was working during that time. Some of them probably paid internships and probably some not paid, but kind of a good mix of both. On the financial literacy side, do you have advice or do you provide advice to parents and students as far as planning the savings for college, either ahead of time or what if you find yourself you haven't saved enough? What can one do?
So one of the things that we definitely advocate and share is really look at the return on investment for the college education. And people don't always want to talk about. They go, I want to go to my dream college. I want to do this. And at the end of the day, it really comes down to how you're going to be able to pay it back. If you're pursuing a degree where you're going to be making $60,000 or $70,000 a year, borrowing $250,000 probably is not a good idea. There's lots of options where you can go to school in state. You can go to a commuter campus. You can start out at a 2-year and transfer. You can go with certifications. What we recommend parents and teens do is have the conversation, because I think what ends up happening is people just assume there is no plan. We've seen this from our data, is that you have a lot of high school students who are seniors who think, I'm going to be able to do everything with grants and scholarships. I'm not going to borrow very much money. And then at the end of the day, they borrow for almost everything. And that's where you can get into trouble. Student loans are an important tool, but it shouldn't be the only tool. I've heard things like doing it's a 3-3-3 rule, a third, where parents put in a third, scholarship as a third, and grants and earned income from the student as a third. Those are the kinds of things I think folks need to think about before college. And also, again, the cost is identifying the institution of higher learning that makes the most sense cost-wise, because there's public colleges are great, and there's nothing to say that you're going to be limited in your success. I think actually there's been studies out there that unless you're going to become a lawyer or an investment banker, the school you go to doesn't adversely impact your potential earnings. So people shouldn't get hung up on a big name school or necessarily going out of state. There's lots of opportunities where you're in state and public.
I saw that it is a silver lining of the pandemic that families are having more financial conversations. I saw that the figure, I think class of 2020 high school graduates, 60% said that they had discussions about both family finances and then also as that applies to school.
Yeah, wasn't it really interesting because absolutely there have been more conversations because of the pandemic. When we did an initial survey in April of last year when the pandemic first hit, and there were conversations, and they were not of how we're going to pay for college. It was how are we going to pay rent, and that was, I think, an eye opener for a lot of teenagers. It's unfortunate that conversation had to happen that way, but it was an important conversation to have when people were making plans for the future. And so one thing I do see in the survey that we did this year is that you are seeing more optimism now with the current class of graduates 2021. They are more optimistic about the financial future of the class of 2020. And so, it feels like we've kind of turned a corner economically. And I think people are seeing that. I mean, certainly there's still a lot of people who are hurting, but I think overall the economy is doing better, and I think you're starting to see a bit more optimism out there.
And then getting back to the survey, are there numbers that point to the situation for students of color and how that how the pandemic is impacting them differently?
Yeah, so you did see a higher percentage of African American and Hispanic students say that they felt that there would be a decline in the financial support for them going to college. That was one thing that came out of it. If you look at net worth of Black families and Latinx families compared to white families, it tends to be lower, and so that's not entirely surprising that teens would be having those conversations and coming to that conclusion. So again, it's how do we find opportunities to provide support and funding? And I know there's a lot of one of the things that came out of it was this perception that higher education costs increased a lot over the past year. That's actually not the case. College Board said it was flat or even went down. So I do think you're going to see a lot of these higher education institutions trying to figure out ways to make education a bit more affordable, especially for Black and Latinx and other minority communities. So I do anticipate seeing more of that here in the coming months.
Since you mentioned really considering carefully the cost of different colleges and different, different paths, whether it's an in-state college or going to a private college, did the survey include the impact of the pandemic on kids or students looking at like a 2-year community college, looking at some of those alternatives?
Yeah, I mean, what we saw was a greater interest in 2-year schools and alternative pathways. What was surprising to me was that you did not see a huge increase in looking at online education for higher ed. I think that sector is fairly saturated, and so there probably wasn't a big room for movement there. Also, if you look at online only higher ed, it tends to be more adult learners, folks who maybe are coming back to college later on. And so that I did not see a huge impact on, but you did see a bit more, again, with the exploring certifications, looking at the 2-year options. So it is affecting it. I mean, but again, to I think our perception on it at Junior Achievement is as long as there's some momentum going forward. I mean, if you're coming out of school, as long as there's a plan to move forward and say you're going to a 2-year for a bit versus a 4-year, there's nothing wrong with that. And people should be encouraged to explore things that make the most sense for them, given everything that's been going on.
Unfortunately, after 12 months of virtual learning, most students probably do not want to commit to another year or two of learning. Do you care to speculate on like what the future of education might look like because of the cost being so high? Is there a possibility that things can actually change? Or do you think that this path of increasing educational costs will just continue as it has been?
Well, I think you've heard stories of, especially like smaller educational institutions, liberal arts colleges and things like that, that have actually suffered over the years. The historically Black universities have been impacted as well, colleges and HBCU. So you may see an acceleration of that. I'm not sure because of the economic impact of this and the fact that you are seeing a bit of a shift in behavior. So that could potentially have long-term impact on the number of schools that are able to basically be able to keep going. I wouldn't be surprised if you saw things like some mergers with schools and things like that, especially those private institutions that aren't maybe as well known. So I could see that as being a long-term potential on it. To your point, virtual, I think people have kind of reached a saturation point to a certain extent. So I think you will see a lot of interest in kids going back onto campuses and things like that. I think there's probably been a little bit of equilibrium there. We did see a shift more toward the online and hybrid over the years. It's probably kind of hit an apex, I would think, and you're probably going to see a bit more of the in-person stuff happening now. So the cost part of it, it just comes down to, what happens legislatively. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about some student loan debt forgiveness that obviously would have an impact. So that part, I think, we'll have to kind of see what happens with that part of it.
And do you think that the pandemic will have some lasting effects that don't change?
Well, I know from our perspective, we are definitely going to be using digital probably more than we had before, because again, we did have to scale up. There are certain communities that digital actually helps us in terms of reaching. But again, I think you are going to see kind of a return to some of the more traditional models as well. So I think you'll see innovation come out of this. I mean, it's, they call it a black swan event on Wall Street, where things are so significant, there's permanent change that comes out of it. And I think that's definitely happened with the pandemic. But I don't think it's going to be a complete shift one direction or the other. I think you're just going to see a bit more hybrid here, a bit more virtual here, a bit more traditional there. So I think at the end, I think it'll be the end result. I think it's going to be very beneficial to students and educators, but it is going to take a while to figure out what that ultimate impact is going to be.
I understand that you have school-aged kids.
Yes.
Have they participated in junior achievement?
They have. I've got actually all of them have had JA at one point or another. My oldest son, he actually graduated, he was class of 2020 college and graduated with a mechanical engineering degree. And he's just been working in a lot of things not necessarily related to that, but he does want to get into the field. But he actually, at one point, because of my involvement with JA, actually took a JA class and did marketed a product and decided that was not for him. So there are some educational things, as well as if you go to a junior achievement program, and like Job Shadow is a great example of that, where we take kids into workplaces. I've heard stories of people wanting to be a lawyer, and then they spend the day at a law firm and decide that it's not for them. Not a knock on lawyers. It's just there's probably something they saw on TV and had one vision of it, and then went in and realized there's an awful lot of work here, and it's not always exciting in the courtroom. You actually have to grind through it. So there's things like that kids discover as a result of our programs.
Well, that's invaluable, because if they can discover that at an early stage, rather than investing years of education and then starting a job that they didn't like and have to have a career change.
Exactly.
Yeah, that is huge. For our listener who, may have school-aged kids, but we also have business owners too who could be volunteers. How do they get more information?
So if you go to ja.org, you can actually look up the JA office nearest you. So our programs are implemented by those 105 offices across the country, and so it's really important to engage with them. And you can, if you have a student, you can find out if JA is offered in your school, or you can talk to your school and see if you can get JA into the school. And for the volunteers, business owners, things like that, you can see if there's opportunities close by. We actually have a program called JA Launch Lessons, specifically for entrepreneurs, where entrepreneurs are very busy. So it's only an hour to go in and talk to kids about your entrepreneurial journey, and that really has a big impact from the inspirational standpoint. Once you get kids hooked and engaged, then they are a little bit more apt to learn more of these things on their own as a result of that. And so, entrepreneurship, a lot of that is about the inspiration, a lot is about that drive and seeing what the possibilities are. And so really welcome anybody out there who's interested in getting involved with JA to contact your local JA office at ja.org.
It's really exciting to potentially impact these young kids, at this stage in their lives, that can really make a measurable difference in the path that they take, which is exciting. Ed, I'd like to ask all the Inspired Money guests, and this can be for you personally and also from JA's point of view, but how do you define success?
Well, I think you define success as happiness. That can be different in the ways you accomplish it. But if you're able to figure out a way to be happy, if it's financial, can certainly be part of that. If you're not having to worry about day-to-day expenses, or if you're in a job that makes you happy, or if you've always wanted to become an entrepreneur and you've done that, makes you happy. That's really what it comes down to, is figuring a way to become the person that you were meant to be and to find that happiness. So that's how I would define it.
Well, thank you for educating us about JA as well as the survey, because college and the pandemic is certainly a seismic shift changes are happening.
Yeah.
Can you tell the Inspired Money listener and viewer where to follow you and find out more?
Yeah, so if you're going to connect with us online, Twitter, we're at JA_USA. And then we also, you just look up Junior Achievement on Facebook and LinkedIn, you'll find us pretty easily. So yeah, happy to share that information.
Great. I will include that in the show notes. Thanks so much, Ed.
All right. Thanks, Andy.
So what was your favorite Inspired Money moment? I like what Ed said about really looking at the return on investment for a college education. If a degree can land you a job making $60,000 to $70,000 per year, borrowing $250,000 is probably not a good idea. That's real practical advice. JA has great programs. My wife participated as a high school student, and she even got some scholarship. Go to juniorachievement.org to search for an area near you. Of course, that's as a K-12 student or a JA volunteer, where you can make a true difference in your community. If you had a different favorite Inspired Money moment, please let me know by posting a comment below. And please hit like right now if you enjoyed this interview. For watching until the end, I want to send you this Inspired Money sticker. Go to inspiredmoney.fm/Andy, send me your name and address, and I will put one of these in the mail to you. Thank you so much for joining me on this mission. Have an inspired week and do something that scares you, because that's where the magic happens.